To me, a violin is not a tool. It is a part. It's a total extension of me, and I feel very much. For me, nature is the essence of it all, and the sunlight gives us water, which is very important to survive. And I think the wood itself gives us the real fruit of the wood itself gives us not only warmth in fire, but also feeds us with sound. And that's a tremendous supplement. To have the violin as your friend all your life is a tremendous supplement to me. And thank God there were people like Stradivari and Amatis who gave us this supplement. And what a lucky thing to be able to sit here and hold this great instrument in my hand. I mean, I've always wanted to hold it because it's always behind a glass case. It must come out of a case because it's nature. It must live, it must breathe like I do, like we all do. You know, it takes a breath and it goes. It's beautiful. In every country of the world, various cities have become synonymous with one great name or tradition. And situated in the region of Lombardy in northern Italy, about 50 miles southeast from Milan, and alongside the river Po Valley, you will find the town of Cremona, famous worldwide for the craftsmen it produces in the art of making stringed instruments. And one particular craftsman, Antonio Stradivari, lived and worked here until his death in 1737 at the age of 93. Since the 18th century, he has been regarded as one of the great violin makers of all time. To mark the 250th anniversary of Stradivari's death, the authorities of Cremona and many associated with the craft of making, restoring, and preserving rare instruments have arranged an exhibition here at the Palazzo del Comune. Antonio Stradivari's house and workshop was in the Piazza San Domenico, now the Piazza Roma. The commemorative tablet reads, "Here stood the house in which Antonio Stradivari brought the violin to its highest perfection and left to Cremona an imperishable name as master of his craft." Stradivari had learned his craft from Niccolò Amati and built his career on an inheritance of 100 years of Cremonese violin making. There is a school for violin makers in Cremona, which carries on the tradition started by Andrea Amati in 1530, a tradition which produced both Stradivari and that other great violin maker, Guarneri del Gesù. To this day, there are reported to be 100 violin makers and at least 80 studios still around the city. Stradivari was married twice and in all had 11 children. We know that 2 from his first marriage worked with him and also became violin makers, but they never developed the unique success of their father. In tonal excellence, design, and accuracy of workmanship, his instruments have never been surpassed. Here we have the Cremonese Stradivari, dated 1715. The reason we know the date is because we have the original Stradivari label inside. It's absolutely beautiful. It is in great preservation state. It has the most extraordinary quick response. I mean, of all strats I've ever played, this is the quickest, just a touch of the bow on the string, and the sound is absolutely focused, centered. It isn't. And very little distortion in the overtone. That's what makes it so extraordinary. It's clean. I first came here in 1966 or 67. All my life, I've wanted to be in Cremona. This is sort of a mecca for me. And when I first arrived in Italy, I wasn't doing very much. I was just visiting Italy for the first time. And naturally, I hired a car, chauffeured car yet. And I drove from Milano, drove me here from Milano, and I arrived in the city of Cremona, and the first person I saw, I said, "Dove la casa di Stradivari?" And the person looked at me and went, and I got so hurt. All my childhood, all my upbringing was to finally go to the master's place, birthplace, and where he lived and so on. And so there, I was very, very disappointed. But subsequently, I've learned that not too many people knew about Strad here, but it doesn't take away from the great master. Strad to me is a kind of a light, brilliant, pure sheen sound. It's very similar to, say, if you are up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you see this extraordinary sunrise, and it's this pure kind of light golden color. That to me is a Strad. A Guarneri, I say Guarneri del Gesù, which I play, immediately I think of thunderstorm, because it has a whom, but it also has that other quality. It doesn't have quite that sunrise, but it has some other quality, which is hard to describe really. But that's the major difference for me in the two. And it comes from application, this is immediate. On a Guarneri, you do that. Here, if I do that, it chokes the sound. Here, but you have to release the pressure as much as you can. At least for me, I have to. this is on this fiddle that I just half an hour ago looked at. On my fiddle, I would have to play the same thing. And I would achieve this. Now that's more comfortable for me. In the exhibition, we can take a look at some of the other 45 or so models that have been brought here from all over the world. An international committee was formed to assemble them and organize the event, all headed by my dear friend Charles Beare, whose firm of instrument makers and restorers I have used in London for many years. What makes that instrument so special? I mean, from your point of view. I mean, is it a Lamborghini? Is it a Rolls Royce? Is it a Mona Lisa? What is it?
Well, it's a work of art. I mean, it's a great piece of sculpture, if you like, all the way through. Well, it's made out of raw wood. You cut down the tree, and then you fashion all the individual parts of the instrument out of the bits of those trees. And there are no two makers who would ever do it the same way, any more than there's any two painters who would paint the same picture. And Stradivari really was the greatest personality and the most comprehending personality in terms of works of art that there's ever been in our line. Plus, he made the musical instrument for you. I mean, that's what's extraordinary.
But did he actually have a phenomenal ear that could tune that wood in the raw when he actually went? Did he actually go to the forest and cut the wood himself?
No, I think it floated up the River Po from Venice, and it came from
You mean
Yugoslavia.
really floated over?
Well, I think that was the way you moved trees around. Was the spruce for the fronts came down from the Dolomites, and the maple for the other parts came from Yugoslavia and places like that. And the transport was definitely up and down the Po. And I think, you know, there must have been a selection available to him, and he chose what he could get.
What did he study? Sound engineering, acoustical engineering, like we know it today. What did he know about sound?
I think what he understood was architecture, and I think he understood the structure of the instrument, because to make it work for you, you've got to have the lightest possible structure consistent with strength. I mean, obviously it's not allowed to fold or bend, or the neck's not allowed to fall out, and that sort of thing. And in order to get it to vibrate in the most free way, you've got to understand what the stresses are and how they can be best resisted with the wood, and yet how the wood can still vibrate. I'm
still amazed of how he learned it at the time. Where did he, I mean, he studied from whom? He studied from Amati.
Well, the violin was more or less invented here by Nicholas Amati's grandfather, so that makes already 3 generations, and then you have Stradivari comes along. And, I mean, he was very strongly influenced by all 3 of those Amatis, and then, you know, he spent really the first 20 years of his working life just figuring things out very gradually. Then he accelerated in the 1690s. I mean, his ideas were everywhere, trying to improve. And then round about 1700, he went back to basics. He just thought, I'm going to make a Nicholas Amati grand pattern and see what happens. And then it really took off. And the extraordinary thing is that his best instruments are made around 1714, 15. And in 1714, he had his 70th birthday. And then, you know, this is the peak of his working career. And then he goes on for 20-something years.
Why is it, and what is it that makes that instrument so special? First of all, from a point of view of sound, and which you explained already, but preservation is most important. I mean, it's 250 years.
Yes.
And they're still, and we go through snowstorms today and aeroplane trips at 35,000, and you open the case and you tune it up and there it is, it's fine.
That's right.
It's amazing.
It is totally amazing. But partly I think it's this question of getting the structure right so that it is strong. But then to the wood, he applied a substance, I mean his famous varnish, which really did 3 things. I mean, it preserves it, it makes it look beautiful, and it quite definitely introduces a quality of sound and a warmth of tone and a speed of response that is not there on the other instruments made from the same wood at the same time in other parts of Europe.
Where are these instruments from? Where have they come from?
Well, they come from all over the world.
Is that because people own them?
That's right. I mean, they're very far spread out now. I mean, obviously they were all made in Italy, but even in Stradivari's time, I mean, King James II of England had a set in 1685. You know, he was hitting the
so he was actually, he had quite a bit of money in his lifetime.
Oh yeah, there's a saying here, you know, as rich as Stradivari in Cremona at the time. And, oh no, he did very well, and I mean everybody wanted to buy his instruments, and I don't think I mean there were 92 left when he died, I think, but Even so, he probably got rid of quite a lot.
He made how many altogether?
They think about probably 700 or 800, actually would be my guess. Other guesses have been 1,100, but I don't see how 500 can have disappeared.
So Strad is going to be here forever, eh?
I think so, because then the ones that are well preserved are not deteriorating, and the musicians, I mean, they knock a few edges off now and then, but they don't deteriorate with musicians. The ones that are not quite so good have been dealt blows by people in my profession in the 19th century and earlier, and you know, I think people now know how to look after them, how to fix them. I think they'll go on for hundreds of years. I mean, I'm sure they will. This one is the Helia. He made, the survivors are 10 in number. Really just for variety, he made some inlaid instruments, and you can see this is inlaid with bone or ivory, diamonds and circles all around instead of the usual purfling, and then on the sides it's also inlaid with ebony and to a pattern.
Does it give anything to the sound, that ivory?
No, not really. These are you know, really for sale to the richest of his buyers, I think. And he kept a quartet of them all his life, and they belong now to the Spanish government. This next one, this is the Tuscan violin of 1690, and it's part of a quintet, 2 violins, 2 violas, big and small, cello, that were presented to the Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1690. And it's interesting because the quintet is now together for the first time since the 1780s. Because in the 1780s, the guy who was supposed to be looking after them actually was selling them out of the window. And this one went to Ireland in 1794. And
was it played in Ireland?
Well, it was sort of an amateur who had it. And it's really never been played until quite recently. If you come round, you can see the back is absolutely full of the most gorgeous orange varnish.
Oh, wow.
And the Italian government bought it in 1953. And well, the viola here, you know, because you played a whole tour with it in about 1971 with Isaac Stern.
Yes, my old friend. Well, the great Boris Groyd played on that.
That's right.
Sure, many years.
Quartet.
Yeah.
But it's reunited with the mold on which it was made, and all Stradivari's designs and templates.
These molds he made for each violin, each viola, there's a mold, right?
Any important order, he made a whole new mold. And here he has to make a contralto viola, and especially for this quintet. So he made a mold, and he's written on it that he's made it for the Grand Duke of Tuscany, and he's dated it the 4th of October, 1690. And on it were built up the sides of the instrument, and then from there he goes on to make the back and the front. He chose the thicknesses of the strings, and he's written a note here saying these are the correct thicknesses for the strings of the contralto viola. So. Now this is the large viola of the Tuscan set, and it's particularly interesting because it's the only Stradivari that's still preserved with its original neck, fingerboard, tailpiece, and even the bridge is original.
Wow.
There you've got the pattern for the bridge on the bottom of the case.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the actual bridge.
What does TV stand for?
Tenore viola.
Tenore viola.
See, and the inlay is the
It's so
coat of
perfect.
arms.
It's so perfect.
That's the coat of arms of the Grand Duke himself there, on the fingerboard.
Oh, goodness. If I could play as well as those instruments look, boy, I would get good.
I think you play better. That's the Arquinto viola here, which is a very elegant, long-cornered one, belongs to the Royal Academy of Music. But over there you can see he made guitars.
He made guitars?
There are 4 of them in existence, and that's come from South Dakota, actually, to be here.
South Dakota. But look at that varnish.
Yeah. And on the back of the peg box you can see his inscription. Made it in 1700. This is the Cristiani cello. It's a gorgeous instrument, but its main claim to fame is that Mendelssohn wrote the song without words for Lisa Cristiani, and she played it on that. It's very deep red varnish.
Beautiful.
Then they haven't all come out of collections. This is Anne-Sophie's Mutter's spare instrument.
Oh, yes.
It's one called the Emiliana. She uses another one at present, but that's a very fine 1703. Lovely piece of wood, enormous great flames. This, I think, is one of the most beautiful instruments in the whole exhibition. It's called the Park. It's made in 1711, and it's kind of almost new. It's exactly how the French copyists of the 19th century saw those Stradivaris, and that's what they were trying to imitate. And of course, VM.
These purflings are absolutely perfect, aren't they?
Yeah. And, I mean, he's 67 when he made that. So
67?
He's just heading towards his best period. And absolutely full of the most gorgeous orange varnish and really bold fiddle. There's even the pattern for the original bridge there. And then we come to the empty case here.
The empty case?
This is the stolen violin, but...
Oh! Somebody stole a violin?
Well, it was stolen from Carnegie Hall in 1936.
No.
And we've just recovered it, and it's right there if you want to see it. We've just taken it out.
That?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
It's unusually red. It's all
well, whoever stole it has very good taste.
That's right.
Well, in that case, I'll see you later. Would you like me to play it?
Well, we just literally strung it up at the end of last week, and nobody has yet played a note on it. And so it'd be interesting to hear what you think.
Well, I need a chin rest, but this is
well,
a chin rest.
You don't get one today.
Whose fiddle was this?
This is, well, it was Bronislaw Huberman's.
Huberman?
Yeah, it was stolen. He was playing on another instrument, and this was taken from his dressing room in Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
And
how did you get it back?
Well, it suddenly started to turn up about 2 years ago, and last May, there was sort of a blaze of publicity in the end. We actually came back to Lloyd's, who were the insurers and paid the claim 50 years ago.
Well, Julian Altman was on his deathbed. He was dying of cancer. And I went to the hospital, and he said, we must do something about my violin. Now, I'd known him for over 17 years. And I'd known it was a beautiful violin. Anybody could tell that. But he never, when I would ask him, what kind of a violin is this? He'd say it's a Bastardi. So he said to me, you must do something about the violin. Go home, open up the case, and inside, and he was a very secretive person, so I'd never touched his violin. Inside, between the case and the cover, you'll find some papers. So I went home and I found these. I was absolutely appalled. I was shocked. Here were all these copies of old, Xerox copies of old newspaper clippings from 1936. And I'm reading Huberman's violin, stolen from Carnegie Hall. And I went back to the hospital the next day and I said, are you telling me that this violin you've been playing ever since I've known you, I've known him for about 17 years, is the Gibson, Huberman's violin? And he said, yes. So I said, how did you touch it? How did you get it? He said, well, I was a young man, about 21 years old, and he was playing in the Russian Beare in New York. And he said, this man came one night, who was a friend of mine, and he described the man. He said he was dark-haired, had big brown eyes, was quite a person with the ladies, very sticky-fingered. And I thought, my God, you sound like you're describing yourself, because this was exactly him. This friend had brought it to him under his coat, because it was cold. It was February 28th. And he said, I've just stolen this violin from Carnegie Hall. I'm dead broke. I need $100. If you'll get $100 for me, I'll let you keep the violin, and your boss can help you, perhaps help you sell it, and then we'll split 3 ways. So Julian went around, this is his story, scrounged around the restaurant and got the $100, handed it over, and said, all right, I'll go to my boss. The friend went away. Julian went to his boss. His boss said, I'll look into the matter. And the next morning he said, ditch that violin. It's hot all over New York. It's in every newspaper. And so Julian ditched the violin. He played it for 51 years. So he played it in some of the best places. He played for Franklin Roosevelt. He played for Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, just to name a few people.
A little awakening.
I think the quality's there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Stradivari.
It's like the end of a horror story, you know, the happy ending, because it has been good and bad all the way.
Well, this is the Davidoff Stradivarius. For me, it's one of the greatest instruments I've ever played on. And I want to thank Charlie for introducing it to me and arranging for me to play it, right? I mean, that's how...
Well, hardly.
Do you remember how it
Not
happened?
much to do with it. I always thought it was going to be your cello one day, and I knew because of Jacqueline Dupre's unfortunate illness that it was sadly sitting in a box all by itself. And I thought it had just the sort of sensitivity that you would be looking for in an instrument, and eventually we got the two of you together a few years ago.
Well, I tell you, it was quite a meeting, because you know what was funny? It hadn't been played for 12 years. At that time, Jackie had stopped playing.
Right.
And when she first lent it to me, I had only heard it in a room at Etienne Vatelot's shop in Paris. And it was the most extraordinary sound. It was so seductive that I fell in love with the sound of the instrument. But with every month of playing it in concert, it kind of, the tone, everything just got larger, fuller, deeper.
Yeah,
Do you ever think of, you know, of wood as something that is that needs to be exercised? You know, that somehow the grain, the fibers in the wood, that somehow by playing with the instrument really, you know, vibrates. When playing deeply into the strings, the whole instrument is vibrating.
Yeah.
And if it stops, if you don't let it vibrate for, let's say, a year, 2 years,
That's right.
it needs to
And it goes
be
to
loosened
sleep
again.
a bit. It doesn't go to sleep so that you wouldn't immediately recognize it as a great instrument, but the vibrations slow down and they quieten down, and the whole thing, yes, it does go to sleep. It's not a bad thing for an instrument, I don't think, to go to sleep.
To go to sleep, but
for
then
a
it
little
needs
while,
to, yeah.
And then it needs to be played again.
So it's almost a living thing that has
That's
moments where
it's
where
certainly
it needs to
organic,
be.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's
the nature of wood.
what's extraordinary also about this instrument is this is the B pattern that.
Well, this is really one of Stradivari's greatest of many great achievements, was designing the proportions of this cello. And not just this one, there are 20 survivors of what he called Forma B. And
Which is
really,
this.
which is that.
Yeah.
And it's been the pattern for all cello makers ever since. All the French cello makers of the 19th century followed it. And although there are some makers who make a wider instrument now, like a Montagnana, because it has more sort of breadth and sheer power.
Right.
These ones, on balance, I think have the easiest response and perfectly adequate volume.
It's amazing because I own a Montagnana, which is a great, great instrument.
Right.
But just comparing the weight between the two instruments,
Yeah.
the other one is very heavy. It's big,
That's
it's
right.
wider. This one, nobody can believe when
That's
they
right.
when they carry it. It's light as a
It's
feather.
incredibly light.
Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
and so which must mean that he had an unbelievable efficiency in knowing his wood, right?
I
the
mean,
density of
he'd got to make it strong enough to withstand all the pressure of the strings and the bow and everything else and the weather. But given that, through clever design, he managed to make them incredibly light and therefore more resonant and more responsive.
You think if he were living today, he'd be designing planes or
I think he'd be
race
jolly
cars
pleased
or
to see
something?
you playing his cello.
But I really believe this instrument has a soul and it has an imagination.
Well, it certainly has a personality, doesn't it? And I mean, that's, you know, comes of anything, I suppose, that's made of wood that's 300 years old, that's been used by, as a tool of their trade by a variety of very good performers most of that time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is...
From Davidoff.
Davidoff
right?
was a well-known Russian cellist who had it.
And Jackie, you know, I think she recorded her first Elgar
With
on this
Barbaroli,
instrument.
yeah, that's right.
And I just remember just
beautiful.
breaking up every time I heard that recording, as I'm sure you did also.
Sure.
And when I first played an Elgar, it was a very scary experience, because not only did I love this instrument, its sound and all, but because I loved Jackie's playing and her performance of the Elgar, I almost freaked out because there were so many things she did that happened naturally. It's as if her spirit was also involved with the instrument, and it was a very touching experience, and it continues to be every time I play that piece.
Do you find you hear enough sound? Because people say of Stradivari cellos that they feel the sound is going out straight forward, and that you don't hear as much as you would like to hear always. I think that was what Jacqueline's criticism of this instrument was, that she couldn't really hear herself play fortissimo. We were hearing it fine, but...
Charlie, I can't help but comparing sound and memory of sound with memory of taste, like with wines. And it seems to me that there's so many analogies that you can draw, but particularly from the form of memory. First of all, a sound hits you, you digest it. You have a sense of density of whatever. With wine, there's oakiness, flavor. You think of its composition, but then there's a glow afterwards. And with this cello, I know that in a hall, when we're talking about volume, that actually it doesn't hit you over the head with, its massiveness, but the glow is what makes part of the sound memorable.
That's right.
Now think of this thing, I mean, just like a... There's something very, very subtle and strong and supple about the sound at the same time.
There's a sort of magical quality there. It's got center and yet it spreads out, and it's got sweetness and yet it's got brilliance. And I mean, I find it terribly difficult to describe in words, and wonderful just to sit back and listen to.
Well, I can tell you're a Strad fan. As am I. But I mean, here's an example of what brilliance it can produce. Okay.
This Stradivari is from 1710, and I bought it about 4 or 5 years ago because in a certain moment of playing, I had the impression that my other Stradivari, 1703 Emiliana, did make a border for me. I had ideas in my imagination which I couldn't realize on the Emiliana. And this one is also coming from Chicago, from Fushi, and was in possession very long of an Englishman called Lord Unraven. Actually, there was also a violinist, the niece of Joachim, which played on that. But or he was more important, Lord Unraven, certainly richer, or there is another reason why it got this name. Emiliana still is in my possession, and in the moment, unfortunately, in Paris. Otherwise, I would have loved to make more noticeable the difference, not only with words, but with the sound, the difference between Emiliana and Lord Unraven, which is, in fact, not only a question of size of the sound, this one is much larger in the sound, but also the brightness, which is in the Lord Unraven much stronger. And the possibilities of colors, of you know, phrasing. In the same moment, you have much larger range of colors in this violin. For me, it's the ideal. If you understand the special connection Stradivari also had himself with violins, of course, there's this popular story that before he made a varnish, that means just the necked violin, was with him in his bedroom. He really lived with the instruments for a very long time until he decided to make varnish on them. For my taste, Stradivari is more close to the ideal I have in my ear, more close also to a feminine voice. Del Gesù, for example, Guarneri del Gesù is very masculine, also very tough for playing, pretty rough instrument. It's much larger, you need, you know, huge fingers, and I think it's something for a real guy. I could never manage with a Del Gesù, and Amati, that's of course out of any question because the sound is just too small. But I have another one, Nicola Galliano, which is close to Stradivari's quality, but there's this special personality missing, this excitement you get of even of touching Stradivari. What I especially admire at this Royal Academy, what is very rare in an institution, that we have here 6 Stradivaris, which is really a huge amount. I mean, where they have the Tresor, I hope it's very well locked. We have 4 violins, 1 viola, and a cello. And actually, the selection also is very carefully made who is allowed to play on the instruments. Because it's not a solution to leave everybody playing Stradivari just to have it played. Because Stradivaris are very sensitive persons. So you also must find the right person to go with the instrument who suits him. And I think these instruments will be played also for the very important celebration we have for Stradivari here in London, which is actually the most important one taking place in England. Of course, every city is making that. Cremona had a large exhibition of 47 instruments. But the concert in the beginning of December is the event in England for Stradivari, organized by Royal Academy, of course.